Hello and welcome to the Forma Models Condominium Development Financial Model. Forma Models created this model to analyze the financial return of a for-sale condo development project where units and parking spots are sold through the construction process. The model is developed to support up to a 3-phase construction schedule. This means that the project is built and sold through a phasing process. The model allows for an analysis period up to 5 years. The model allows for general project assumptions as well as unique user assumptions for the land acquisition and financing, construction phasing, construction costs, construction financing and draws, sale assumptions including velocity phasing, as well as a full return waterfall with 3-tier promote structure including a return of capital and preferred return. The model includes the ability to straightline construction hard and soft costs or apply an S-curve, which has been proven to be a more accurate representation of construction cost outlays. The README tab states the model purpose, highlights common use cases, and provides an overview of functionality, formatting, and all of the unique modules within the model. This tab also provides additional documentation, contact information, and a summary of additional products and services available from Forma Models to support your analysis needs. The Assumptions tab contains all user-entered and selected inputs. If you do not need to customize formulas, this is the only area in the model for inputs. The first assumption section is for general property and development information. Inputs range from the property name and address to building characteristics, such as the unit count, development area, number of floors, and floor area ratio. This model includes parking spaces as an additional development and revenue stream. The General Assumptions section has inputs for the analysis date, which assist with version control, as well as the closing date, which sets the starting point for the entire analysis. Selections are available for the model currency and building measurement to clearly communicate output to end users. Land acquisition and land financing assumptions are entered next. The land acquisition price is entered on a square foot or meter basis depending on the user's model measurement selection. The land acquisition closing costs are entered as a percentage of purchase price. The land financing loan to value and interest rate are input in this section to establish the land acquisition financing stack and cost of capital. The next assumptions to be input are for the construction schedule. The first assumption set is for the construction timing, beginning with the construction start date and duration to establish the total construction timeline for the development. The model is programmed with the ability to allocate development costs on a straight line or S-curve basis. The construction financing assumptions are entered next. Inputs are needed for the percentage of units required to be sold before the debt facility can be drawn, as well as the interest rate for the construction debt facility. The construction assumption section concludes with inputs for the development costs. Inputs are required for the hard costs, soft costs, furniture, fixture, and equipment costs, as well as the customer acquisition costs. As a reminder, hard costs are for traditional construction items such as the sewer lines, foundations, vertical construction, roof, and interior finishes. Soft costs are for items like permits, architects, engineers, and consultants. Furniture, fixtures, and equipment will be utilized for items purchased for use at the property such as lobby furniture, gym equipment, or any other furnishings for amenities. Customer acquisition costs are for marketing, sales collateral, and any other advertising expenses incurred to execute a sale. The next assumption set relates to sales. Inputs are required for the selling price per condominium unit in the model measurement basis, as well as the cost per parking space. An input is provided for annual sales price growth, which will be applied to the price per condominium and parking space throughout the development and sales period. Developers sell housing units on a deposit and payment schedule. This section includes inputs for the initial deposit, unit completion deposit, and final payment when occupancy permits are delivered. The sales phasing assumptions are input next. The model is pre-built to allow for up to 3 selling phases through the development cycle. The inputs entered in the sales phasing sections establish the revenue model timing and drive all cash inflows from the development. Phase 1 begins with a start date equal to the construction start date. Users enter the phase duration to establish the phase end date and develop the sales phase lifecycle. Users input the number of condominium units and parking spaces sold per month through the phase. Phase 2 is laid out in the same way as Phase 1. Phase 2 begins with a start date equal to the month following the Phase 1 end date. Users enter the phase duration to establish the phase end date and develop the sales Phase 2 lifecycle. Users input the number of condominium units and parking spaces sold per month through the phase. Phase 3 is the final sales window and begins the month following the sales Phase 2 end date. The duration of Phase 3 is equal to the difference between the start of Phase 3 and the overall development end date. The number of condominium units and parking spaces sold per month throughout Phase 3 is equal to the number of condominium units and parking spaces unsold at the end of Phase 2 divided by the Phase 3 duration. The final assumption inputs are for the waterfall promote distribution structure. Inputs are available for the pro rata sponsor and investor equity commitment as well as the developer equity commitment. The promote structure is pre-programmed to model the return of capital with priority to the sponsor and investor, a preferred return, and 3-tier promote structure. At this point, you have entered all assumption inputs and we can walk through the pro forma calculations and output. Please note all pro forma models are completely unlocked, allowing for full model transparency and the ability to customize to your use case if needed. Please also note that all pro forma models include a dynamic header showing high-level critical information for your analysis, such as the development characteristics and various return metrics. The pro forma tab contains all calculations within the model and begins with the sales phasing schedule. Phase 1 leads the sales phasing and contains a monthly calculation of condominium units sold in the month, condominium units sold in the phase, and condominium units sold in aggregate. Condominium units sold are also shown on a percentage basis as the number of condominium units sold in the month within the phase, the cumulative number of condominium units sold within the phase, as well as the aggregate number of condominium units sold to date. The value of condominium units sold in the month, cumulatively within the phase, and in aggregate is also calculated. The same aforementioned metrics are also calculated for parking spaces. Phase 2 of the sales process follows Phase 1 and is outlined in the exact same format as Phase 1. The sales phasing contains a monthly calculation of condominium units sold in the month, condominium units sold in the phase, and condominium units sold in aggregate. Condominium units sold are also shown on a percentage basis as the number of condominium units sold in the month within the phase, the cumulative number of condominium units sold within the phase, as well as the aggregate number of condominium units sold to date. The value of condominium units sold in the month, cumulatively within the phase, and in aggregate is also calculated. The same sales calculations are available within the phase for parking spaces. Phase 3 of the sales process, which is the final sales phase, is outlined in the exact same format as Phase 1. The sales phasing contains a monthly calculation of condominium units sold in the month, condominium units sold in the phase, and condominium units sold in aggregate. Condominium units sold are also shown on a percentage basis as the number of condominium units sold in the month within the phase, the cumulative number of condominium units sold within the phase, as well as the aggregate number of condominium units sold to date. The value of condominium units sold in the month, cumulatively within the phase, and in aggregate is also calculated. The same sales calculations are available within the phase for parking spaces. The next section of the Pro Forma tab is a consolidated payment schedule driven by the sales phasing schedule we just reviewed. The payment schedule contains line items for initial deposits, completion deposits, and occupancy deposits for condominium units as well as parking spaces. The revenue is consolidated by sales phase, allowing users to see detailed breakdown of the timing of revenue cash flows by line item, phase, and product. The next section prepares the pro forma operating income statement. The section begins with consolidating the sales phasing for condominium units and parking spaces into aggregate monthly revenue. Revenue is followed by expenses, which are broken down into land cost, closing costs, hard costs, soft costs, as well as furniture, fixtures, and equipment costs and customer acquisition costs. The expenses will be allocated in the pro forma based on the cost distribution method selected in the Assumption tab. As a reminder, the expense distribution methods available are straight line or S-curve. Expenses are deducted from revenue to develop the monthly gross income. Given that this is a development model, the gross income can be viewed as the monthly capital requirement if the value is negative or the monthly income if positive. The interest expense is generated based on the debt schedule we will review shortly. The interest expense is deducted from the gross income to develop the monthly net income. The next section of the pro forma contains a detailed capital tracking schedule. The schedule tracks capital draws for the developer equity, sponsor and investor equity, land acquisition debt, and construction debt facility account. The cash balance after capital draws line tracks if the project is profitable. If the account is equal to zero, the project is not yet profitable and is utilizing equity and debt investment. When the account is greater than zero, the project will be considered profitable for the month. The debt repayment section tracks any repayments of debt to reduce the loan balance throughout the development period. The capital balance section tracks the cumulative account balance for developer equity, sponsor and investor equity, land acquisition debt, and construction debt. This section is very important as it will allow you to see the aggregate and investor level capital at risk at any point in time throughout the project. The interest expense section calculates the monthly interest expense for the land acquisition debt and construction debt facility based on the outstanding debt balance at that point in time and utilizing the interest rates input in the Assumptions tab. The waterfall distribution concludes the pro forma tab. The waterfall begins with the net equity invested by month. A return of capital is provided to the investor and sponsor of the development first. This means that the investor and sponsor of the deal receive all of their capital back before the developer receives their return of capital, and any returns are distributed. The next section of the waterfall provides a return of capital to the developer following the return of capital to the investor and sponsor. Following the return of capital to the investor and sponsor as well as the developer, the preferred return is provided on a pro rata basis. The cash flow remaining for Tier 1 line checks to see how much cash is remaining following the returns of capital and preferred return cash distribution. If the value is greater than zero, the model will progress to the first promote tier. If the value is less than zero, the model will stop here as there is not cash available for the next tier. The first promote tier is calculated based on the hurdle and promote entered in the Assumptions section. The cash flow calculated from the promote tier is distributed pro rate between the investor and sponsor as well as the developer based on the promote assumptions entered for your use case. The cash flow remaining for promote 2 tier line item checks to see if there is cash available following the first promote tier to progress to the second promote tier. If the value is greater than zero, the model will progress to the second promote tier. If the value is less than zero, the model will stop here as there is not cash available for the next tier. The second promote tier is calculated based on the hurdle and promote entered in the Assumptions section. The cash flow calculated from the promote tier is distributed pro rata between the investor and sponsor as well as the developer based on the promote assumptions entered for your use case. The cash flow remaining for promote tier 3 line item checks to see if there is cash available following the second promote tier to progress to the third promote tier. If the value is greater than 0, the model will progress to the third promote tier. If the value is less than 0, the model will stop here as there is not cash available for the next tier. The third and final promote tier is calculated based on the hurdle and promote entered in the assumptions section. The cash flow calculated from the promote tier is distributed pro rata between the investor and sponsor as well as the developer based on the promote assumptions entered for your use case to conclude the cash flow. All cash will be paid by the end of the third promote tier, meaning that the cash flow remaining after tier 3 will always be equal to 0. Now that we have consolidated the cash flows and executed the waterfall distribution, we will calculate the returns using internal rate of return and multiple of capital from a variety of perspectives. The first return basis is the unlevered return, which can be viewed as the development level return if the project was executed on an all-cash basis, meaning the project was fully funded with equity and no debt. The second return metric is the levered return. The levered return can be viewed as the development level return under the input capital stack assumptions but with no fees and promote. The next return metric is the investor and sponsor level return. This return is on a levered basis and includes the impact of fees and promote paid to the developer. The final basis is the developer level return. The developer return is levered and includes the benefit of fees and promote received through executing the project. As a rough guideline, developers will typically seek to deliver returns between 20 and 30% to investors and sponsors. The developer receives an outsized return from the fees and promote received through executing the project. The S-curve tab contains the detailed S-curve calculation, which is utilized if you decide to employ the S-curve cost distribution method in your development model analysis. The Data Validation tab contains all controlled lists within the model and can be customized to your specific use. The Output tab contains a consolidated decision driving report of the entire analysis, which is preformatted for printing or to save as PDF. The output report begins with a detailed uses and sources table. The uses and sources shows how funds will be allocated throughout the development project as well as the source of funding to pay for the development. The output report then summarizes cash flows and returns on an annual basis. Cash flows, internal rate of return, and multiple of capital are summarized on a deal level unlevered and levered basis as well as the investor and sponsor level as well as developer return. Sparklines are shown for each cash flow, which are a nice built-in Microsoft Excel tool to quickly visualize the cash flow trend line. Bar chart visualizations are provided in the cash flow and return section to assist with interpreting the model as well as presenting the output to investors, partners, and other stakeholders. The bar charts showcase the internal rate of return and multiple of capital on an unlevered and levered basis, as well as at the investor and sponsor level as well as the developer level. The sales phases are highlighted next in the output report, showing key performance indicators for each phase. The metrics included for each phase include condo units sold per year within the phase, the total value of condo units sold per year within the phase, and average sale price per condo unit sold per year within the phase. The same metrics are provided for parking spaces. The same consolidation and summary format is provided for sales phase 2 and phase 3. The sales summary section concludes with a total section consolidating key sales performance indicators and figures for all three phases of the development to paint a picture of the overall development performance. Microsoft Excel trendlines are utilized throughout the sales summary section to provide easy-to-understand visualizations of sales progress over time through each sales phase. The sales velocity of condominium units as well as parking spots by year are visualized utilizing dual-axis combination bar and line charts showing. The bars in the charts represent the cumulative value of condominium units and parking spaces sold. The line in the charts represent the cumulative percentage of condominium units and parking spaces sold. The pro forma income statement concludes the output report. The pro forma income statement presents an annual consolidation of revenue and expenses. Revenue is comprised of condominium unit and parking space sales. Expenses include land costs, closing costs, hard costs, soft costs, as well as furniture, fixture, and equipment costs as well as customer acquisition costs. Expenses are deducted from revenue to determine the gross income, which is further reduced by interested expense to develop the annual net income of the development. Sparklines are utilized in the pro forma income statement as well to provide quickly accessible and visual trendlines of key pro forma income statement line items. Thank you for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed this pro forma models walkthrough and encourage you to visit our website to try the model for yourself.